Have you had multiple children with multiple needs? Or have you been in a different headspace with various babies and been able to come up with various baby feeding plans depending on where your headspace was? This week, my guest, Lindsay, shares her experiences feeding her 2 babies and the different feeding plans that she came up with from the beginning based on what she knew she was capable of in those moments. She also talks about some very interesting situations with pumping at work. I frequently tell my clients that it is okay to take each next right step as it comes when it comes to baby feeding. So even though many of us create long-term goals when it comes to lactation, I want to feed for 1 year or 2 years or 6 months or 3 months or until my maternity leave is over. That's okay, but also it's okay to make the next right step. And this story is a perfect example of that. So enjoy Lindsay's fantastic story of taking the next right step. And also, she's just a great and funny person who is very reflective about her experiences and knew what she wanted and needed at any given moment. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. Having known only a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board-certified lactation consultant. I'm your host, Lo Nigrash, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore the systemic, medical, and cultural barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that you know your baby feeding struggles were not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. So we met, this is the first time we're actually meeting, but we met in the ASA Collective, which is a collective for mostly women podcasters or women identifying podcasters. And you have an amazing podcast that I just started listening to. I binge as soon as I play because it is so good. So tell me all about it.
Sure. So it's the Ye Olde Crime podcast, and that's old with an E at the end. Some people have a hard time finding it. And it's a podcast I do with my younger sister, Madison, where we discuss historic true crimes that took place pre-1900. So that's like our cutoff. And we basically cover a lot of obscure crimes that a lot of people haven't heard of before. So you won't ever hear like Jack the Ripper or H.H. Holmes on our show. It's going to be a lot of people and things that most people have never heard of before.
Yeah. And so we've had this on the calendar for a few weeks now, at least. And I was a little bit afraid to listen to your podcast because I love true crime, but I'm very picky. I was telling you this before we hit record. I'm very picky about true crime. So I didn't want to listen and not like it. And then when I met you, be like, yeah, it's not my thing, or have to lie. Yeah. And so, we had our interviews scheduled. And so I finally started listening yesterday when I had a whole day to like clean around the house. And oh my gosh, I fell in love from the very first episode and I couldn't stop. So it is so good. And you don't feel bad when you're listening because it feels like you're learning something too because of the historical perspective.
Yeah, you feel a little bit more like disconnected from the crime that happened just because it happened so long ago. I mean, obviously you still feel bad for the victims of the crimes that we discussed, but at the same time, it just hits a little bit different because it's not like current events type of thing.
Yes, exactly. And your sister is so funny. And she doesn't usually, even though it seems like you've told her what it's going to be about, she doesn't remember. And so...
Yeah, usually each episode I spring it on her. So she has zero idea what we're going to be discussing each week. So she like comes in fresh, has no idea what we're going to be talking about. And I don't know how far you've gotten, but like my favorite thing to do is spring cannibalism stories on her.
Oh my gosh, no, I haven't heard that.
There aren't a whole lot in our back catalog, but oh my God, she absolutely hates those episodes. And it's so funny listening to her like comment in those episodes because it makes her so uncomfortable. So
yeah, it's so good. Yeah, you guys are so good together. Yeah, and anyone who is even slightly interested in true crime, slightly interested in history, they're so good. So I highly recommend any busy mom who's nursing in the middle of the night or needs a little brain stimulation during the day when you are tired of imaginative play or on a walk with your kids or at the playground. I highly recommend that you check out this podcast because I loved it from the moment I hit play. And I love that as soon as you get on the podcast, you just dive right in. The format is so great and the topics are really great. And then you have these bi-weekly shows where you have other podcasters on.
Yeah.
And you have them guess the meaning of Victorian era words.
Yes. So it's a segment that I started the second year we did our podcast, and it's called Can You Crack the Cramp Word? And cramp word is actually Victorian slang for a difficult or obscure term.
Oh my gosh.
So that's part of why I picked it as like the title of the segment. And I basically just invite fellow podcasters on the show, give them the opportunity to tell our listeners about their show, kind of how they started it, what it's about. And then I give them 2 Victorian slang terms to try to guess. And half the fun of the segment is just hearing what people come up with. Right or wrong, it's always a great time and it's super funny.
Yes. I'm really excited because I'm going to get to do that with you.
I know. I'm excited to have you on.
Yeah. So it's going to be so fun. And I love your podcast. I hope everybody goes and listens. But I've brought you on because you are not only an amazing podcaster, but you are also a parent.
I am.
You have 2 kids, right?
Yes, I do. I have 2 girls.
Okay. So that means you have 2 baby feeding stories.
Mm-hmm. So my husband comes from a large family. He's one of 6 kids. And growing up, obviously, it was just myself and my sister. It's just the 2 of us. So I didn't have a whole lot of experience with babies, but I loved babies. And it was shortly after my husband and I got married that we decided to start trying for children. And when we had my oldest, P, I didn't breastfeed with her because it was a whole new thing. I was kind of overwhelmed and I just made the conscious decision to not go that route because I didn't want to mess it up, if that makes sense. Like it was just something where I was like, I kind of we knew we wanted to have more than one. And I was like, I kind of just want to work my way through the first one. So then when we get to the second one, I can kind of have a better idea of what to expect. And I kind of regret doing that now after I had my second one. So we had my first one in 2008, and I had my second one in 2014. So I had S in 2014. And obviously, vastly different pregnancies. The first one was really easy, except for towards the end, because I had her at the end of August. So my feet were swollen. I was just like, I want to be done. It is hot. Get her out of me. And with my youngest, she came in June. So much better weather. She was my baby where the old adage of what they're going to be born with a lot of hair if you have really bad heartburn. The whole last like 2 weeks, I was like bedridden due to heartburn. Like I couldn't move. It was so bad. So when she came out with a full head of hair, I was like, there it is. I knew it. I knew it was coming. So I did make the decision with S to breastfeed because I felt like I had kind of missed out on that with my oldest. It's something I wanted to experience and try for myself. And it's a lot harder than people think it is.
Yeah. So can I go back to that first experience when you made that decision? did you feel any judgment from any care providers or from any people in your life?
My husband was okay with it. He kind of understood my anxiety going into it, and he was totally okay with making the choice to do formula instead of breastfeeding. There was one nurse that was a little kind of, oh, really? You don't even want to try when we were in the hospital. But then I had a younger nurse who could tell I was extremely uncomfortable with the idea of doing it. And she was like, it's okay to bottle feed. Like, you don't need to feel guilty for not choosing to breastfeed. It's not for everybody. You're not the only person who has decided it's not for me. And that made me feel a lot better. And I don't know if it was just a generational thing. And that's kind of where the judgment was coming from. But I did feel much better after the younger nurse said that, because you don't want to feel guilty for how you choose to feed your child. And it was just something that at the time I was just super uncomfortable with. And she had to be rushed to the NICU as soon as she was born because she had the cord wrapped around her neck. And so it was something where it was like, I was not in a good headspace to even think about that, because I'm worried about her. I didn't even have a chance to see her really before they took her away. And all the fun with the afterbirth and being sewn up, because I tore a little bit. And so I wasn't even in a headspace to think about that. I was more concerned about her, not about breastfeeding or any of that stuff.
Yes. And you had made this decision prenatally in pregnancy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. And so when the nurse who came in and was like, you're not even going to try, did you have a response for her?
It was a little bit of both, because my husband was there with me. Like, he knew, because we had talked prior to going to the hospital, that it wasn't something I was going to do. And I told her that. I said, I'm not going to do it. It's not part of my birth plan. We're going to be strictly bottle feeding with formula, and that's just not something that I'm comfortable with doing.
Yeah. And for any care providers listening, we have to listen to patients. We don't know what's going on with people. There could be trauma. There could be underlying issues with trauma. And even if there's not, people are allowed to make their own decisions when it comes to feeding their babies.
Well, and it's about our own bodies too.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And we shouldn't be made to feel guilty for making the decisions that we make about our bodies.
We feel enough guilt as it is for like every decision we make with our kids, and there are as much of an advocate of human milk as I am, this is what my whole career is. Like, in the end, as they say, they all end up eating goldfish off the floor, and there are much bigger decisions we have to make as parents that impact them psychologically and, mental health wise. And what matters most is that the parent feels really good. It's much more important that the parent feeding the baby and that both parents feel healthy and happy and supported than it is that they feed human milk. And so if I have a choice between a parent sitting in front of me that feeds human milk and a parent that is like feeling as good about themselves in the postpartum period as possible, I'm going to choose that second option every single time.
It was good for me too, because it gave my husband an opportunity to sort of bond with P right away, because he was able to help with that, as opposed to, either waiting for me to feed or waiting for me to pump. And not that he didn't help feed after those type of situations as well, but knowing my anxiety going into becoming a parent, that really helped me to be able to kind of follow his guidance as far as being able to see, as someone who has been around tons of babies, because he comes, like I said, from a big family. He's got, it seems like, hundreds of cousins. that have all had children, it seems like. So he's got way more experience with infants than I do. And it was a comfort to me to be able to kind of turn to him and be like, okay, what do I need to do? Things like that. It's unfortunate, but that was really the only thing that was negative about that birthing experience, was just that one pushback. Otherwise, the whole rest of the experience with giving birth, the stay in the hospital, the care we were given after she was born and before we left the hospital was great.
Good.
I had no negative things to say about it.
Great. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so then it was 2008 to 2014. So that's like a 6-year gap. The same as you and your sister.
I know. I didn't do it intentionally, but it ended up happening. And I was like, oh man, I just made another decision where it's going to be myself and my sister repeating history all over again.
They're going to start a podcast together.
Years down the road, they're going to start a podcast. And it's like, you may not like each other now, but years from now, when you're in your 30s, you're going to be like, this is it.
Right. Yeah, it'll be like a Pokemon podcast or something.
Yeah, something crazy.
Okay, so then 6 years later, prenatally, you decided that you were going to try to breastfeed.
Yes. And part of that decision came from a coworker of mine had a baby while I was, I think, in the middle of my pregnancy. And she made the conscious choice to breastfeed. And so it was nice to get her perspective on things and get her suggestions of things that we could do to make sure that I'm, producing enough milk and how pumping works and all of that stuff. So it made me a lot more comfortable going into the experience. Having that kind of background knowledge of what she told me really kind of helped settle my anxiety down once S was in the world and I was able to kind of start down that road of breastfeeding.
Was there anybody else you had ever known who had breastfed or pumped before?
I'm recalling some of my husband's cousins breastfed. And I think that was really the only exposure that I had to that. I was the first one in my friend group to have kids. And a lot of the people in my friend group from college chose not to have children, which is totally their choice and their right. But I always admired women that I would see out, like hiding in the bathroom, breastfeeding their children at the mall and things like that. And just kind of knowing that there are people out there that did it and aren't ashamed of it and don't want to hide about it. Like it's a natural process. You're feeding a human being that you made. And I don't think it's something that people should be ashamed of or feel like they have to hide away.
Yeah, we're mammals.
We are mammals.
Yeah. And you said you had conversations with your mom about her experiences, or?
I spoke with her a little bit. It sounds like she was not successful when she tried it with my younger sister. So then they switched to formula. And so that was the thing too, where I was like, well, maybe I won't be successful with breastfeeding. But I still wanted to give it a try and see kind of if it worked out.
When you decided not to feed, did you have any issues with engorgement at all that you had to deal with and remedy?
I did. It was so painful.
Yeah. What did you do? And did anybody give you any advice, like in the hospital? Did anybody come to you and say, hey, this is what's going to happen. Here's how you deal with that to make sure you don't get infected? Or
the hospital where I gave birth did a home visit the week after you gave birth, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So when the nurse came to do the home visit, I kind of asked about it and she gave some great suggestions for, and I didn't even know about this. It was either lettuce or cabbage that you put that you put in your bra, which is the weirdest thing I've ever heard of and I've ever done in my life as far as my breasts are concerned. And that really helped. So it was something where I did that. I think I ended up putting like sanitary napkins in my bra a little bit too, sometimes because it would leak a little bit. And I would massage them in the shower and hot shower. And I think it only took like a week and a half before like the engorgement kind of went away.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never something where I had to go to the hospital because it got like irritated or infected or anything. So thankfully I was able to kind of work through it.
And did you ever feel anything emotionally about that milk?
I did feel a little bad. And looking back, I'm surprised that I didn't think to even try when I was going through the engorgement. Because now looking back, having breastfed, I'm like, oh, well, I should have just tried to see what would have happened if, as a way to kind of release the pressure and kind of ease the pain that I was going through. But again, I was probably just so anxious about everything that it didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
It was one more thing I had to get through,
A lot of people are very surprised that even though they make up their mind to feed formula, that the milk still comes.
Yes.
Your body doesn't know that you've made up your mind because it is a physiological response. Now, it does, if you don't feed a baby, it does eventually go away, but the milk will still come if there has been a delivery of a placenta. And a lot of hospitals, I don't think, do a great job of explaining to people how they can manage the milk and reduce their pain. Tell me about what it was like giving birth and then in those first days trying to feed your second baby.
Well, her birth is hilarious because I call her my werewolf baby because she was born on Friday the 13th during full like super moon.
Whoa.
During like the witching hour. And it was hilarious because I had these two lovely young nurses. They're probably in their early 20s. And my doctor was delayed because she was delivering twins via C-section. And she told them explicitly, like, don't come and get me unless she is ready to like push. Which I totally understand. And one of the nurses checked on me and she's like, oh, we need to get her right now. And I was like, we good? And she's like, yeah, don't worry about it. And so the other one like ran out of the room. The doctor comes back. She's still like, she must have run there because she's still in her stuff and she's like pulling all of her stuff off and like throwing it away. And she's like, and she peeks and she's like, why didn't anybody tell me? S was like right there. Like she was just ready to like fall out. And
were you on an epidural?
I was on an epidural.
Okay.
And so literally the doctor was just there to kind of like catch her and then transfer back to the nurses. And she's like, no, I got to go back to my surgery. And then she like ran out of the room. She was like, congratulations. And like ran away. And I was just like, okay, bye. Thanks.
Amazing.
But yeah, we did skinship right away as soon as she was cleaned up. And we waited a little while until I think a lactation specialist came in to like kind of help like walk me through like, okay, here's how you try to get her to latch and things like that. And I did experience issues trying to get her to latch while I was in the hospital. As soon as the milk kind of came in, it was starting to get painful and I would, be up it felt like every 2 minutes I was up trying to feed her, would have to call the nurses in and be like, I need help. I can't. It feels like she's not on there and it's starting to like chafe because she's kind of like, just trying to get whatever she needs out of there, but she's not on quite right. I feel bad for the poor nurse because she had to keep like putting her finger in S's mouth to like move her around and like move my breast around to try to get her in the right spot. And I'm just sitting there like, what? Okay. Like just trying to watch, but at the same time, just being like, I just want the pain to go away. I need her to suck and start getting stuff out of me. And I did take a number for a lactation specialist that I could call after we got home because I was still kind of worried that she wasn't going to latch once we left the hospital. And there was a lot of chafing. I did have the pump. So at times when she didn't seem to be able to latch, I would just pump and then we would feed her that way. And I did end up, I can't remember how soon it was after we were out of the hospital. It might have been like a couple weeks. I started getting concerned because I wasn't producing as much milk. And I couldn't tell if that was because she wasn't latching properly, if it was something on my end where I wasn't doing something to produce enough milk.
And how did you know you weren't producing much milk?
I was comparing it to how much I had gotten when I first started pumping, and then I noticed the amount was starting to like significantly drop where I wasn't getting much at all.
And was S gaining weight? Did she have pees and poops? Was the doctor concerned?
The doctor wasn't really concerned because she was a good weight. Even though she was a little jaundiced when she came out, like she bounced back right away. And they were more concerned about me. Like, is this something where you want to keep going down this route, or do you want to transfer over to formula? And after my first experience with pee, I was like, I really want to try and do this. I've only been doing it for a couple of weeks. I don't feel like that's enough. I don't want to give up. And that's when they were kind of like, okay, talk to this lactation specialist. Make sure you bring the baby with. They can look at what you're doing, walk you through things. They might have some suggestions for you on how to increase your milk production. And so I booked the appointment right away. They were extremely helpful. It was an older woman who'd been doing it for years and years and years. So I felt like I was in good hands. And she really put me at ease. She was like, you're not the only mom who's gone through this. Like, because you feel a sense of guilt. Like what's wrong with me that I'm not producing this milk? What's wrong with me that I can't get her to latch properly? Like, what am I doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And she was really good about putting me at ease and making me feel a lot better. She put me on some supplements to kind of help with the milk production. And my favorite part of it is she's like, I want you to make beer cookies. And I was like, what? aren't you not?
And cookies?
I was like, aren't you not supposed to have alcohol when you're breastfeeding? And she's like, no. And then she explained and she gave me the recipe and she's like, and it'll make a lot of cookies. So you're going to want to like freeze some to have for later. And she's like, but just eat them throughout the day. And I promise it'll help. And I was, you're skeptical. You're like, beer cookies, what? Okay. What is this weird mumbo jumbo? And it worked. Like between the supplements and the beer cookies, my milk production increased. It was back where it was before. I felt a lot more confident in feeding S because she had shown me some tips and tricks to like get her to latch properly, how to pull her off if she's not attached properly, how to make it easier to switch her from one breast to the other. And I kind of wish she would have been the one that was there in the hospital with me when I first gave birth.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so appreciative of all she did for me because then I felt way more confident in sticking with our original plan to breastfeed. And I got that emotional connection with S that I feel like I really didn't get with P. And I think that's my one regret is I missed out on that emotional connection with her just because it is, it's a very connecting experience to have that time with your child where you're like, you're literally feeding them from your body. And
right. Yeah.
so you have this special connection and bond with one another.
I love that she built up your feeling of being
my
able to feed your baby.
Yeah. And it was, I forgot to mention too, it was great because she had me bring my pump with as well. She's like, maybe you're using the wrong size. And that could also have an impact in how much you're producing or how much is coming out. And I was using the wrong size. So
yes.
So we got the right size. That really helped as well. She recommended things to help with the chafing, like the creams that you can put on after you're done feeding to really help with the soreness and the rawness. And yeah, I can't thank her enough. The whole experience was great. It was extremely helpful to kind of be able to see what the difference was between unsecure latch and like an actual latch. That really helped me to like visually know, okay, she for sure is not latched properly. I need to adjust her.
And to feel a difference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
An unsecure latch, as you're talking about, those kind of shallow latches, it is so painful.
It's so painful.
Are you hoping to receive the kind of care that Lindsay received? The one-on-one support where someone sits down with you and problem solves what you are experiencing so that you walk away feeling like you can feed your baby in the way that feels right for you. A person who will address the problems that you are having so that after the appointment, you feel more equipped to take care of your baby. A person who hones in on the difficulties that you are having. I can be that person, whether it is virtually or in person. And in most cases, I can bill your insurance. Reach out to me at www.quabbinbirthservices.com. I can't wait to talk to you. So how long did you stay home before you did return to work?
I was home for 3 months before I returned to the office.
Were you like worrying about milk supply during those 3 months and a return to work?
My concern was making sure that I had enough milk produced and stored before I left for work for the day, that I didn't have to worry about her running out before I came home.
Mm-hmm.
And we did have some formula on hand where if he did have to sub a little bit with formula, if we ran out, he could do that. But then as I was at the office more and like pumping more, I was able to produce enough where she could get through a full day until I got home from work in the evening. And then I could feed her right away and she'd be okay.
Did your workspace have a pumping space? This was already after the Affordable Care Act, so it was required.
Mm-hmm.
Were you in a space that was primarily men, primarily women?
It was primarily women. And this is the job where my coworker had pumped at work because she was breastfeeding. And she worked in the warehouse section of our building, and I worked in the office space. And our pumping experiences were very different. When she was pumping, she had to do it in the bathroom/shower that was in the warehouse. And then when I came back to work, I was able to do it in the office space of the old CEO. And the first day that I was back and was pumping, so it was an office space where it had like the windows on the one side of the door. So we had to cover up the windows so people couldn't look in, obviously, and I would have privacy. And I would lock the door. So the first time that it was closed and locked, one of my male coworkers tried to open the door. Like he was like, who's in there? No one should be in there. And that's when our HR person came running out and she was like, that is a private lactation space. You need to leave that alone. You are not allowed to mess on that door. And he was like, oh, okay. And he kind of backed off. But, that's a little startling when you're in the middle of pumping and then all of a sudden someone's trying to open the door on you and you're like, I'm very vulnerable right now. I'm extremely exposed. And but I think some of the higher up people in the building were kind of like, that's weird that she is allowed to be in there and no one else is allowed to be in there. And it's like, well, I'm allowed to have a space. Like, I'm not going to go hide in the bathroom and, pump like I'm doing something bad. I had been unhappy working there for a while. So in the process of going back to work and breastfeeding at work, I was looking for a new job. And so I ended up finding a new job working at a nonprofit. And when I was interviewing there, I made a point of asking, do you have a space set aside for nursing mothers? because I am breastfeeding. And the HR manager at the time, she was so excited that I said that I was breastfeeding, because she's like, I have the perfect room for you. I'm going to have it all set up before you get here. It's going to be wonderful. And she was this lovely older woman who had tons of children of her own, and she breastfed her children, and she was wonderful. And it was a completely different experience. It was another office space, but it had a locking door, no windows. It had a comfy couch I could sit on. It had a fan in there, because sometimes you get really hot when you're like pumping and you start getting all sweaty and then you feel really gross.
Right.
And it had...
And then you come out with like stains on your
pit stains. And people are like, were you running outside? No, I was breastfeeding. It's a lot of work. And it is a lot of work. So it had this fan, and I could control the lights, so it wasn't like fluorescent lights beating down on me. So it was kind of calming. And there was a mini fridge in there, so I could store my milk in there without having to have, like an ice pack and a lunch bag and that kind of thing. And so it was perfect. It was like night and day. It made me feel like I was back at home, sans baby, but it was so much calmer. I could listen to music while I was in there. It was just a way better environment than the one that I came from. And it made pumping at work something where I wasn't even anxious about it anymore, because I knew that I had this wonderful space that I could go sit in.
Yeah. Did you notice a difference in your supply?
I did. I felt like there were times when I had to change the bag, like mid-pump. And I was like, I never had to do that before. So it made me feel really good. Like I was in a good place. I was producing enough milk. Obviously, if I had to swap the bag. When I got hired, one of the other people was on maternity leave, and she also breastfed. So it was this fun little dance we'd have to do to be like, okay, do you need to go pump? Let me know when you're done, and then I'll go. So it was kind of like a rotating schedule of who was in there, and we had to make sure that we kept our milk on two different shelves, so we knew which one was which, so we didn't get them mixed up.
I know.
And but it was great, and she loved it too. She's like, this is more than I could have expected coming back to work. So
I love that. Do you want to name the nonprofit?
It was the Minneapolis Jewish Federation.
Amazing. Pumping and breastfeeding is so hormonal that if you are feeling anxious or uptight while you are pumping, it will have an impact on your supply. So it does not surprise me that your supply increased, or it had a positive impact on your output once you were in that more relaxing space.
Yeah.
You said you had to change the bag mid-pump. So were you pumping right into a bag?
Yeah, I was pumping into a bag with the pump that I had, because I didn't have a whole lot of bottles, and it was easier for me to pump into the bags while I was at work and then do the bottles at home when she was feeding, obviously.
Yeah. So anything else about your experiences? How long did you end up breastfeeding and pumping?
I think I ended up doing it for a little over a year, just because... So S is a little bit of a scamp, and towards the end, it became more of a game for her, and she would like chew instead of suck. And after like the third or fourth time of that happening, I was like, you know what? I think we're good. I think we're at a good point where we can stop, because as fun as it is for you to chew on my nipples, I would rather you not. So
absolutely. Yeah.
That's what a pacifier is for. You can chew on that as much as you want, but
exactly,
mommy, not so much.
Right. I can totally understand that. Yeah. So any advice to people going back into work situations that you would give to them now that you're kind of years out, as they're heading in from their maternity leaves, as they're thinking about setting up their own lactation spaces?
I would say speak to whoever is in charge, whether that's HR or a manager, and kind of let them know before you go on leave kind of what you're looking for in a space. Like, this is where I would feel comfortable. These are the types of things that would be great to have. even see if there's a space that you could kind of find before you go on leave to know, okay, when I come back, this is the space that I'm going to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have to bring something from home, like say they don't have a fan and you have to bring a fan in from home or something, you kind of already know what the space looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what to expect when you come back to the office.
Awesome. I love that. And do you want to direct the people to where they can find Ye Old Crime podcast? I'll have it all linked in the show notes, but let my listeners know where they can find you online and in all the podcasting spaces.
Sure. So you can find us pretty much on wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if you are looking for more information, you can go on yeoldcrimepodcast.com. Again, that's old with an E. And we are also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And I do have a TikTok where I do funny filters and make fun of myself. And we'll occasionally start doing stuff about actual episodes and not just funny filters and things like that. And you can always reach us via email if you have any questions at yeoldcrimepodcast@gmail.com.
Amazing. And I heard on one of your podcasts that there is I'm not on Twitter, but there is a Twitter devoted to taking things that you guys say out of context.
Yes. Oh my God, they're amazing. So that one is Ye Old Crime OOC, so out of context. And it is amazing. I retweet everything they put out. It's hysterical. And I shared it with Maddie in our last episode, and she lost her mind. She was like, this is amazing. And she was like, now I really have to be worried about what kind of stuff I say on the podcast. And they reached out to me the other day and they're like, you guys need to stop being so quotable because we have stuff scheduled through September already of stuff that you've said.
That's so great. And you have a fan page on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Or is it on Facebook?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Which is great. So I think it's amazing. We love our fans. They're so great. We love talking to our listeners, and some of them have given us some really good story ideas too, which is always great because, you know, as I said, it's obscure stuff in history. So sometimes they'll find things that I've never heard of that I'm just like, I'm really excited to learn about that and talk about it on the show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't thank our listeners enough. They're like the best.
Yeah. And Maddie's your sister, right? Maddie?
Yes.
Okay. And she's engaged. Is she getting married this year or next?
I think they're going to push it back to next year just because they moved recently and a lot of stuff. But yeah.
All right. And she is hoping to have a trampoline at her wedding. So if anyone wants to sit on the trampoline, you know, I heard that on one of the episodes, and I would just love for her to have a trampoline and drive her fiance crazy at the wedding. So
I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
We'll have to post video afterwards, of course.
Of course, right? Yeah. If anyone wants to donate an old trampoline.
It's funny that you say that because we had a local listener send us a Craigslist ad, and they're like, someone's giving away a free trampoline.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh my God, I should go see if it's still there. And then somebody had already gotten it by the time they sent us the ad. But I was like, next time.
Yeah. You'll get it.
We'll get it next time.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to share your stories. I love stories like this of someone who, you know, just wasn't quite ready the first time and, you know, was able to have a pretty successful breastfeeding story the second time. And, you know, I think it's really important to hear these stories of making the decisions for yourself that are good for you at that time. And I'm really glad that we live at a time and place where we can feed our babies the way that we feel is best at the time.
Agreed.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Do you have a story like Lindsay's? I would love to hear about it. And the way you can tell me about it is by joining my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. This is the place where we explore the barriers that make it difficult on a societal level to feed our babies. And it's for parents, it's for practitioners, for people who support parents in the perinatal period to help them have a better postpartum period when it comes to feeding their babies. So join us there at the Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. It's always linked in the show notes. I also want to mention that if you are looking for books about breastfeeding, about childbirth, even about parenting or about talking to your kids about human milk making, I have a book page and I have some of my favorite books linked. I've read them all, and you can go there and you can select a book and it benefits the Milk Making Minutes. So go to that bookshop link if you are looking for particular books about any of these topics. Thanks. Bye.